I was 14, 8th grade, my last year of middle school. That day I had to go, so I quietly pushed back my chair in math class, grabbed the old wooden plank they used as a bathroom pass, splintered, worn down, and stained from years of sweaty palms, and strolled alone through the mostly silent hallway. When I reached the main floor bathroom, a taped-up sign greeted me. Out of order. Use upstairs or downstairs bathroom. Great. Just as I stood there debating which way to go, a man appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. A random older guy. He looked to be in his late 40s, maybe 50s. Not someone I recognized. Definitely not a teacher. He wasn't wearing a visitor badge either. He gave me a smile that was polite, almost too polite, and asked, "Hey there, you know where the nearest bathroom is?" His voice was friendly, casual, but something about him put me a little on edge. Maybe it was the way he smiled like we were old friends. Or maybe it was the fact that I had never seen him around the school before. Still, I answered, keeping it short. Yeah, either upstairs or downstairs. He nodded, thanked me, and turned toward the stairwell. I didn't feel like having any more awkward hallway chat, so I chose to go down instead, opposite of where he went. As I headed for the lower level, a thought nagged at me. Who was that guy? He wasn't staff. Maybe a parent? But what parent just wanders the halls asking kids for the bathroom? The lower level of our school was always kind of eerie. It was mostly deserted, just a row of 4 bathrooms and some extra locker rooms that were barely used unless there was a sports event. When I reached the boys' bathroom, I pushed the door open. As usual, the light was off. That wasn't unusual. This bathroom was the least used one in the entire school, and the automatic lights always took a second to flicker on. A cold draft met me as I stepped inside, air that smelled faintly of metal and mop water. I moved past the sinks and into one of the stalls, the door creaking quietly as I shut it behind me. I pulled out some toilet paper, carefully covering the seat like I always did, and sat down. The silence in there was absolute. Just me and that dim, echoing quiet. Or so I thought. Suddenly, a blinding white strobe pulsed through the bathroom, slicing through the dimness like lightning. A split second later, the shrill wail of the fire alarm pierced the air, muffled at first, then unmistakable. A fire drill. My heart immediately dropped into my stomach. This was the first fire drill of the year, and I was locked in a basement stall, alone, completely out of place. Panic set in fast. What was I supposed to do? Would I get in trouble for being here while everyone else evacuated? Would someone come looking for me? I figured I'd just finish up quickly and get out before anyone noticed. The flashing light kept strobing. Every few seconds, the room was thrown into stark, colorless brightness. The alarm, echoing faintly from outside, was already annoying. But then, it got louder, much louder. It took me a second to realize why. The bathroom door had opened. Heavy footsteps clacked against the tile floor and marched purposefully toward the row of stalls. I froze, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the siren anymore. The footsteps stopped directly outside my stall. I looked down. A pair of feet, adult-sized, stood firmly in front of the door, perfectly still, facing straight toward me. I tensed up, assuming it was a teacher checking the bathrooms for any stragglers. But something was off. They didn't knock, didn't call out, didn't ask if anyone was in there. They just stood there, silent. Should I say something? Make an excuse? But I couldn't get a word out. Something about the stillness, the silence, locked the breath in my throat. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. They weren't just standing there. From that narrow, hated 1-inch crack in the stall door, the one every student complains about, I saw a face pressed right up against the gap. An eye, wide open, unblinking, staring directly into the stall. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. Then, a quiet chuckle, a low, unsettling sound, almost like a wheeze mixed with amusement, leaked through the door, barely audible over the alarm. I could feel my heartbeat in my teeth. I was breathing heavily now, each breath shallow and fast, my skin prickled with cold sweat. I didn't know whether to scream or stay completely still. Then, without a word, the man dropped to his knees, and he tilted his head, slowly, deliberately, pushing it underneath the stall door. I gasped in shock. It was him. The same man from the hallway, the one who'd asked about the bathroom. His face, partially lit by the harsh flashes of the fire alarm strobe, looked stretched and strange, his eyes wide and glassy, locked directly on mine. And then he moved. He crawled right under the door, like a predator closing in. I was frozen, completely paralyzed, as he squeezed his way into the stall. My entire body felt like it had gone numb, like none of it was real. He grabbed me hard. One hand clamped down over my mouth, cutting off my scream before it could escape. His other arm locked around my torso, pinning me against the cold metal of the stall. "Don't struggle," he whispered, voice low and raspy. "Just relax." Those words, I'll never forget the way he said them. Calm, like it was routine, like he'd done this before. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I was completely trapped, caught in this small, grimy stall under flickering lights, the alarm still screeching outside, and this stranger holding me like a rag doll. Everything slowed down. It felt unreal, like my entire life had been yanked off track in a split second. I was just 14, still a kid. At that age, you feel invincible. Nothing ever truly bad is supposed to happen. But there I was, terrified, powerless, and unsure if I was about to die. And then, like some divine interruption, the fire alarm flared louder again as the bathroom door swung open once more. A voice, firm, authoritative, familiar. "Is anybody in here?" The principal. I tried to scream. The sound was muffled against the man's hand, but the panic in my voice must have come through, because the principal reacted instantly. Footsteps thundered toward the stall. "Open this door," he shouted. "Open it now." The man hesitated. Then, just like that, he let go of me. He yanked the stall door open directly into the principal's face, and then he ran, bolted straight out of the bathroom, and disappeared into the hallway. The principal didn't chase him. He couldn't. He was an old man, probably in his 70s. But he turned and yelled down the hall after him anyway, voice cracking with rage. The school didn't have cameras back then, so, as far as I know, that man got away. The principal turned back to me. His face was pale, shaken,
And then, without saying anything, he stepped forward and hugged me, tightly. He held me for a long moment before finally whispering, "Come on, we'll call your parents." His voice cracked as he said it.
Walking through the halls with him felt like a dream, a terrible, surreal dream. All my classmates had already evacuated, but some of them caught sight of me from outside the building, tears streaking my face as I walked beside my parents to the car later that afternoon. It was humiliating, but honestly, I didn't care. I was just glad I was alive. I later found out that the principal had actually seen the man pull the fire alarm and watched him run downstairs. That's why he'd gone down there to begin with. That's why he checked the bathrooms. Slowly, carefully, he made his way down into that basement corridor, and he chose to check that bathroom first. It saved me. He passed away 5 years ago, and even now I still think of him with a kind of gratitude I can't put into words. He was my hero, in every sense of the word. Back in high school, fire drills were usually a welcomed break, sometimes even fun, depending on which class you were stuck in and which friends were with you. There was one day in particular that stuck with me. It was a Friday, sometime late in the school year, and the sky outside was dark and heavy with clouds, the kind that made everything look dim, even at noon. It was third period. We were barely paying attention in class when the rumors started spreading, whispers drifting from desk to desk like wildfire. Someone said there was going to be a fire drill this period. That was all we needed to hear. Being this close to the end of the year, no one was doing much of anything in our later classes. We figured we'd take the opportunity to disappear during the drill, sneak off to the sump behind the school, near the woods, and light up. It wasn't the first time we'd pulled something like that. We waited, nervous energy building, until finally the moment arrived. That sharp, ear-piercing ring shattered the silence of the classroom like a starter pistol, and we all looked at each other with smirks. The signal had come. It was on. We were the first ones up, laughing quietly as we slipped into the hallway, moving fast before the crowd had a chance to bottleneck at the door. While most of the students on our side of the building were heading toward the front entrance like they were supposed to, we casually veered off toward the back, toward the woods. The hall behind the school opened out near the basketball and tennis courts, and we blended right into the crowd, walking like we belonged there, just a few more students following the rules. But we weren't. We were moving with purpose, every step taking us closer to the edge of school property. We'd done this before, and we were careful about it, strategic. We scanned for any staff members watching the area. No teachers, no security. Perfect. Then, like clockwork, we slipped into a narrow path, a small opening between the tennis courts and a thick line of bushes. It was barely noticeable unless you knew it was there. And that hidden path, it led straight to the sump and the woods beyond. A couple of kids in the crowd watched us as we peeled off from the rest, probably thought we were weirdos or up to something sketchy.
They weren't wrong, but we didn't care. We had a plan. We made it to the sump without any trouble. It was exactly how I remembered it. Just a huge, sunken pit in the ground, surrounded by thick bushes and jagged trees, sitting right at the edge where the school property met the woods. Everyone just called it the sump, though it definitely had some kind of nickname too. I just don't remember it. All I knew was that this place had a reputation. It was where kids went when they wanted to drink, smoke, or do whatever else they couldn't get away with at home. Bonfires, parties, bad decisions. You could still see the blackened, half-burnt logs lying around, like the remains of some teenage ritual. That day was darker than usual. The clouds overhead were an angry gray, so thick and low it felt like early evening instead of third period. The kind of sky that hangs over you like it's just waiting to crack open. There was a breeze too, not strong, but sharp, cold. It tugged at our jackets and whispered through the trees, hinting at a storm creeping in from somewhere just out of sight. Oddly enough, that only made the whole thing more exciting. We waited in silence for a few minutes, listening to the distant noise echoing up the hill, the voices of teachers organizing their lines, the shuffle of feet on pavement. Then, gradually, the sounds faded. Everyone had gone back inside. Perfect. We started laughing, our voices breaking the stillness. My friend dropped his backpack to the ground and unzipped it, pulling out the familiar combo, a metal pipe and his little grinder. As he sat down to start packing it, I happened to glance toward the woods. And that's when I saw it. Just past the tree line, a little to the left, something caught my eye. A face. Or at least it looked like a face. Pale, still, almost motionless. Half obscured by some tall shrubs, so I couldn't see the rest of the body. But what I could see, it was unmistakable. Two dark, sunken eyes, a sharp outline of a nose, maybe even a mouth. It wasn't moving, just watching. At first, I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me, a weird knot in the branches, a trick of the light. But something in my gut twisted. I looked away quickly and nudged my friend. "Dude, look over there," I said, pointing in the direction of the trees. We all turned to look. But the face, whatever it was gone. They looked at me like I was an idiot. Maybe I was. Now that the thing or person was gone, I wasn't completely sure anymore. I mean, I was mostly sure, like 70%, that I'd seen a person watching us. But the other 30% of me started second-guessing everything. It was pretty dark out after all. Maybe it was just a weird shadow or a trick of the light. Either way, my friends didn't want to move. They shrugged it off, lit up, and stayed right where they were. So I stayed too. The moment I took a hit, I felt that familiar shift. The world got a little softer, a little slower, and a whole lot heavier. The higher I got, the more my thoughts began to swirl in that uneasy way I hated. I never really liked smoking, not deep down. It always made me paranoid. That creeping, itchy feeling like something was just slightly off. But I did it anyway, because that's what my friends did, and I didn't want to be the weird one always saying no. But now all I could think about was that face. Was someone watching us? Did they already see what we were doing? Were we going to get in trouble? The questions just looped through my head over and over, each one darker than the last.
That's when my friends announced they wanted to walk through the woods. They were laughing, excited, already heading towards some old shack that, according to them, used to be part of the school grounds, maybe for storage or equipment, who knows? It was only a short walk, maybe a minute or so into the woods. But I didn't want to go. I felt off, way off. The air was starting to feel thick and wet, heavy with moisture, like the storm was drawing closer. Tiny raindrops, barely more than mist, were starting to drift down and cling to my arms and face. The whole place smelled like wet leaves and damp bark. I tried to speak up. We should head back. That storm's coming in. They didn't even acknowledge me, barely even looked, just kept walking ahead, their laughter getting swallowed by the trees. I followed, hesitating with every step, glancing behind me more than I looked forward. And then I heard it. Footsteps, not ours. They were off rhythm, quiet, just enough to make my skin crawl, like someone was mirroring us, just far enough behind to stay out of sight. But I was so high, I couldn't tell where they were coming from, or if they were real at all. Maybe it was just the weed, or maybe we weren't alone out here. In front of us, behind us, to the left, the right. I couldn't tell where the sounds were coming from anymore. Everything around me felt too quiet and too loud at the same time. Then, from behind us, I heard it. A sharp crack, like a thick branch being snapped clean in half. I froze, spun around. "What the fuck was that?" I blurted, loud enough to startle the group. My friends stopped, glancing back at me, confused, irritated. They hadn't heard it. There was no one there. Nothing but the narrow dirt path winding back toward the sump. No shadows, no figures ducking behind trees, just stillness. And once again, I was the only one spooked. They laughed, rolled their eyes. I could tell what they were thinking, that I was losing it, that I was too high to function. I became the punchline, the stoned paranoid one seeing things in the woods. I didn't argue, but deep down, I was sure something had been following us. Eventually, the old shack came into view, just through a break in the trees. And even from a distance, it looked wrong. Bigger than I remembered, more decayed, more off. Like the woods themselves had started to swallow it. Vines clung to the rotting walls, and the roof sagged like it was barely holding itself up. The school had stopped using this place years ago, probably because it looked like a stiff breeze could knock it down. Even the walkway leading up to the door was crumbling, with thick weeds and tall grass growing up through the broken concrete. The front door, unsurprisingly, was half open, wedged there, warped and crooked. We all knew students came here sometimes. People tagged the walls, left garbage, smoked out of sight. Still, something about today felt different. Jack didn't hesitate. He stepped up and shoved the door fully open with one hard push. It creaked and scraped against the floor as it swung inward. Immediately, the darkness inside swallowed the light from outside.
There was barely any sunlight left to begin with, thanks to the heavy clouds and thick trees. But inside the shack, it felt even darker than it should have been, like the shadows clung to the walls, thick and unmoving. We stepped inside, slowly.
Old crates were stacked along the walls, most of them broken, collapsed into themselves. Wooden splinters littered the floor. Everything was covered in a thin film of dust, grime, and mildew. And then the smell hit us. It was faint at first, but sharp, bitter, a kind of sour, rotting stink that clung to the inside of your nose. We'd been in here before, but none of us remembered that smell. Jack muttered something about a dead animal. One of the others said it was probably mold, but no one sounded convinced. Then we heard it, a wet plop. Something soft hitting the ground just out of view, followed by the unmistakable creak of a footstep, something pressing down on the wooden floorboards. Thud. We all jumped, and for the first time, I wasn't the only one who looked scared. In the far corner of the shack stood something. A tall figure, motionless, looming, barely visible in the darkness. The only reason we could even make out its shape was because of the faint sliver of gray light sneaking in through one of the broken windows. Just enough to catch the silhouette of what looked like a person. A very tall person. None of us screamed. We didn't say a word. We just turned around, quietly, calmly, and walked right back out the way we came, like we were hoping we hadn't really seen what we saw. Like if we didn't run, maybe it wouldn't follow. Once we were outside, though, our walk turned into a fast-paced shuffle. We didn't speak. We just moved. Back in the direction of the school, back toward the noise, the people, the safety of civilization. The only thing on my mind was distance. Get away. As we reached the edge of the trees, all three of us turned instinctively and glanced back toward the window closest to where that figure had been. And at that exact moment, crack, a flash of lightning tore across the sky, lighting up the entire woods for one bone-white instant. And in that instant, we saw him. Clearly, he was standing at the window, and he looked wrong. I don't want to speak ill of anyone with deformities, I really don't, but this man, he didn't even look human. Half of his face looked like it was melting, like it had been twisted or torn or pulled downward. One eye was completely obscured by the warped skin. The other was watching us. He was so close to the glass that his face was nearly pressed against it, cheek flattened, lips curled, frozen. I didn't even think. I ran. I just turned and ran. My friends didn't ask questions. They followed. We sprinted back down the path toward the sump, adrenaline cutting through the high like a blade. The trees blurred around us, and the wind started to howl louder, like the storm was chasing us too. We made it to the sump in under a minute, hearts pounding, lungs burning, and finally stopped, crouching, breathless, trying to make sense of what we had just seen. That's when the first raindrops finally started to fall, cold, heavy, relentless. We were soaked almost instantly. And then Jack, His voice shaking, pointed back up the hill, back toward the woods we had just fled from. "There," he said. And I saw it too. Another person. But this one was different. Standing just behind a low shrub, watching us. Only his face was visible, peeking out, unmoving, like a mask hung on a branch. Just like the face I had seen earlier at the edge of the woods. But this one was even closer, 10 times closer. Close enough that if we had moved any closer, we might have seen the details of his face. But we didn't want to, because deep down we knew this wasn't the same person we'd seen in the shack. This was someone else. Without a word, we all ran, this time straight for the school, not stopping until we were huddled under the back entrance overhang where it was dry. The fire drill had long been over. No one was around. The three of us stood there, soaked, shaken, and completely silent for a while. And then, without needing to argue, we all came to the same decision. We were going home. We weren't going to tell anyone. And we were never going back to that shack again. And that's exactly what we did. Our school had this one door, kind of hidden, kind of ignored, that led down a short half staircase into a narrow, dark hallway. A lot of students knew about it. Most had passed by it at some point, but nobody actually knew what was down there. It always seemed locked, always closed, except during fire drills. That was the only time every door in the building, including that one, swung open automatically, like clockwork. Naturally, my friend Kyle and I were curious. Actually, more than curious, we were obsessed with figuring out what was down there. And to be fair, it wasn't even close to the dumbest idea we'd come up with. I'll admit, I wasn't exactly a model student my first 2 years of high school. I got into trouble pretty regularly. Detention wasn't new to me, so sneaking off during a fire drill didn't feel like much of a risk. Kyle and I had 3 classes together out of the 8 total in our schedule, so the odds of us being in the same place during a drill weren't too bad. And as luck would have it, it happened during study hall. Perfect. As soon as the alarm went off, its blaring ring echoing through the building like a siren from some old war movie, Kyle and I didn't hesitate. We bolted. Instead of following the rest of the class to the designated exit, we cut through the hall and ducked into one of the bathrooms. The door was already propped open with a stopper, probably left like that from earlier in the day. We slipped inside and headed straight for the stalls, pushing into one and locking it behind us. Then we waited. We listened as the chaos of the drill played out beyond the tiled walls. Students rushing, teachers shouting, doors slamming. The hallway was alive for a few frantic moments, and then silence. Everyone was outside, which meant it was our time. Getting down those stairs was surprisingly easy. We slipped out of the bathroom, stuck close to the wall, and made our way to the door. It was wide open, just like we expected during a fire drill, and without a second thought, we stepped through. The air changed immediately. The stairwell was dim, lit only by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, its light yellow and weak,
flickering slightly, casting warped shadows along the concrete walls. It gave off just enough light for us to see the next door, down a short half-flight of stairs. That door led to more steps, a deeper descent.
Only this time, the bottom of the staircase was swallowed in total darkness. We searched the walls, fingertips brushing against chipped paint and cold brick, looking for a light switch. Nothing. So we pulled out our phones, letting the pale blue glow of our screens light the way. The further we went, the quieter everything became. The noise of the fire drill outside faded completely, replaced by the low hum of silence, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. At the bottom of the stairs, we found a door. It was old, scuffed up, and had a warped plastic sign bolted to it, "Do not enter," which, of course, only made us want to open it more. We pushed, and it barely budged. It felt absurdly heavy, like it weighed hundreds of pounds, and as we forced it open, it let out a horrible grinding sound, the bottom scraping across the floor like it had come off its hinges. Eventually, we got it open enough to squeeze through. Inside was a square room, small, no bigger than 100 square feet. The walls were plain, made of some kind of old concrete or cinder block. There was no furniture, no equipment, nothing, except the sound. Click, clink, click. A soft metallic dinging, like something lightly tapping metal over and over again. It echoed faintly across the space. The noise was coming from a vent tucked into one of the back corners. We both stared at it. It didn't sound like something mechanical. It sounded alive, like something moving. "Probably an animal or something," Kyle whispered, stepping forward. But then another sound layered in, low, guttural, muffled through the metal. Grunting, groaning, not mechanical, human. We looked at each other, frozen. Then Kyle smirked. "Go check it out," he said, nudging me. "Hover your screen over the vent." It was a dare, and I was about to take it. I needed to know what was in there. Curiosity outweighed common sense. So I dropped to my knees and brought my phone screen up to the vent, angling it to cast as much light as I could through the slats. That's when I heard it. Breathing. Not mine, not Kyle's. Deep, wet, rasping breaths coming from the other side of the metal. I leaned in, slowly, cautiously, pressing my ear closer to the vent, trying to make sure I wasn't imagining it. And that's when something grabbed me. A hand, cold, fast, and impossibly strong, latched onto my ear from inside the vent. I didn't even have time to think. I screamed, loud and raw, as panic shot through every inch of my body. Kyle lunged toward me and yanked the thing's hand off me with a forceful pull. I scrambled backward across the floor, gasping, my phone skidding across the concrete. We both looked up just in time to see it. A hand, thin, pale, almost gray, reaching out of the vent, fingers twitching like it was trying to feel its way out. We didn't speak. We ran. We slammed the "Do Not Enter" door behind us, letting it drag and scrape back into place, and bolted up the stairs 2 at a time, straight back into the bathroom we'd started in. Our hearts were pounding, breath ragged, ears still ringing from the alarm and the scream.
We didn't say much after that. We just waited until the halls filled with noise again, then slipped out into the crowd like nothing had happened. But the next day, we had to know more. So Kyle and I tracked down Tom, the janitor. He was one of those older guys who didn't seem to care much about anything. He was always half listening, half muttering, and definitely didn't love his job. When we asked to talk to him, he didn't seem mad. In fact, he barely reacted at all. "What were you kids doing down there anyway?" he grumbled, mopping near the cafeteria. We told him everything.
The door, the clicking, the groaning, the hand. And then we asked the question we were both terrified to ask. Was there anyone supposed to be down in that room, like working on the vents or something? Tom stopped mopping. He looked at us with this weird kind of blank expression and said flatly, "No one's been in that room for years. School doesn't even use it anymore." We stood there, waiting, hoping he'd laugh or tell us he was joking, but he didn't. "And those vents?" I asked. "Could someone fit in them? Like, is there a way in from the outside or another part of the building?" He shook his head. "There's no access to those vents anymore. Been sealed off since before either of you even got here." Kyle and I locked eyes. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. We both felt it, the exact sinking feeling, heavy in the chest. Because whatever grabbed me, whoever was in that vent, they weren't supposed to be there. And according to the only guy who would know, they couldn't be there.